6 days ago, the United States and Israel killed Iran's supreme leader of 36 years. And today, Trump is publicly telling the world who should replace him. That is not a headline from a political thriller. That is the actual documented situation unfolding on March 6, 2026, right now. Ali Khamenei, 86 years old, the man who ran Iran since 1989, who outlasted 8 U.S. presidents, who built one of the most complex theocratic power structures on Earth, is dead. He was killed on February 28th during a coordinated U.S.-Israeli strike on Tehran as part of an operation the Pentagon officially named Epic Fury. And before Iran has even formally selected his successor, before the Assembly of Experts has convened a vote, before the dust over Tehran has fully settled, Trump gave an interview to Axios and said this: "Khamenei's son is unacceptable to me. We want someone that will bring harmony and peace to Iran," Trump told Axios on Thursday. He then went further. He said, quote, "I have to be involved in the appointment," comparing it directly to what Washington just did in Venezuela. Let that sit for a moment. The President of the United States is publicly stating that he must be personally involved in selecting the next Supreme Leader of Iran. Not influencing from a distance, not pressuring through back channels the way Washington usually does. Personally involved, those are his exact words. This is the central story of March 6th, 2026. Not just the missiles still falling on Iran, not just the war in its 6th day. What comes after, and who gets to decide that? Because the succession question is now the most consequential open variable in the entire Middle East. And Washington just stepped into the middle of it, with both feet on the record in front of cameras. Let's start with what is actually happening on the ground right now, because the war context matters enormously for understanding why this succession fight is so explosive. Operation Epic Fury began in the early hours of February 28th, when U.S. and Israeli forces struck missile facilities, nuclear sites, and the Supreme Leader's own compound, simultaneously across the entire country. Khamenei was killed. Multiple senior IRGC commanders were killed alongside him. Iran's nuclear program has been significantly degraded, though the exact extent of the damage remains disputed. Iran responded within hours, launching missiles at U.S. bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE, and at Israel simultaneously. The war is now in its 6th day as of March 6th. A temporary leadership council is currently running Iran, comprising Judiciary Chief Mohseni Ejei, President Pezeshkian, and senior cleric Ayatollah Arafi. But that council is explicitly temporary under Iran's own constitution. It cannot hold power indefinitely, and every hour it sits in place, the succession pressure builds. The Assembly of Experts, the 88-member clerical body that holds formal constitutional authority to select a new supreme leader, must now make the most consequential decision in the Islamic Republic's entire history. And Washington is already attempting to shape that decision from the outside, publicly, aggressively, with a sitting U.S. president naming names on camera. So who exactly is Mojtaba Khamenei? And why did Trump single him out by name as someone he personally considers unacceptable as a future Iranian leader? Mojtaba is 56 years old. He holds no official government title and has never run for public office. He has never given a press conference or addressed the Iranian public in a formal capacity. And yet, according to analysts at the International Crisis Group and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, he is one of the most operationally powerful figures the Islamic Republic ever produced. For over a decade, Mojtaba served as the primary operational link between his father and the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC controls an estimated 20 to 30% of Iran's formal economy, according to U.S. Treasury sanctions documentation. It runs construction, telecommunications, energy infrastructure, and financial networks operating entirely outside normal government oversight. Whoever controls the relationship with the IRGC controls the real machinery of Iranian state power, and for years, that person was Mojtaba Khamenei. He also built something that matters even more now, and he built something else that matters even more now, a carefully cultivated network of allies inside the Assembly of Experts itself. That 88-member clerical body is the exact institution now tasked with selecting Khamenei's successor, and Mojtaba spent years quietly positioning his people inside it. Trump called him a lightweight in the Axios interview. He said Mojtaba would continue his father's policies and force the U.S. into another conflict within 5 years. He then added, almost casually in the middle of a press availability, that most of the other candidates Washington had considered are now dead. That last line deserves more attention than it got. When Trump says the people he had in mind are dead, he is describing the direct outcome of 6 days of targeted U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran's senior leadership. Washington did not just kill Khamenei. It killed a significant portion of the Iranian leadership structure that existed around him, the people who might have formed an alternative power base to Mojtaba. In my view, that is not a coincidence. The strikes were also political, eliminating certain figures while leaving others, deliberately shaping the post-war succession landscape through the direct application of force. That is a level of intervention in another country's political future that goes beyond anything the United States has done openly since the Cold War era, operations it now openly acknowledges. And Trump is not hiding it. He is comparing it, in his own words, to Venezuela, where Washington effectively removed Maduro and installed a cooperative successor. He called Venezuela the perfect scenario. The Venezuela comparison is doing enormous work in Trump's public framing right now, but the two situations are not structurally similar at all. And those differences explain exactly why this succession play may be far more complicated than Washington is currently projecting. Before we go further, drop a comment right now. Do you think Washington can actually shape who leads Iran after this war? Or does external pressure guarantee that Mojtaba ends up in power anyway? I read every comment on stories like this. This is one of the most genuinely open strategic questions in the world right now, and I want your read on it. If this kind of layered, real-time analysis is why you come to this channel, hit the like button right now. It helps more people find this content when it matters most. Because next we're going to look at what the Venezuela comparison actually reveals in practice, and why the single most important institution in this story right now is a body most Americans have never heard of. It is meeting under enormous external pressure to make a decision that will shape the entire Middle East for the next generation. Ali Khamenei prepared a secret shortlist of 3 preferred successors before he was killed, and his own son, Mojtaba, was not on it. This was not speculation. The New York Times, citing Iranian officials, reported that Khamenei made these preparations during the 12-day war with Israel in June 2025. The 3 names on his list: Chief of Staff Asghar Hijazi, Supreme Court Chief Justice Mohseni Ejei, and Hassan Khomeini, grandson of the Islamic Republic's founder. Reuters, citing its own sourcing separately from the Times, reported that Khamenei personally favored either Ejei or Hassan Khomeini as his successor, not Mojtaba. His own father's documented emergency succession plan, prepared specifically in anticipation of assassination, did not include his own son. That single fact reframes the entire succession struggle unfolding inside Iran right now, and almost no coverage has made the connection directly. The IRGC is pushing Mojtaba. Khamenei's own documented wishes pointed in a different direction, and the man at the center of that alternative, Hassan Khomeini, is still alive. So who exactly is Hassan Khomeini, and why does his candidacy matter so much to understanding what Iran could become after this war? He is 54 years old. He serves as custodian of his grandfather's mausoleum in southern Tehran, a ceremonial role that carries deep symbolic weight inside Iran's revolutionary identity. He has never held formal political office. He was barred from running for the Assembly of Experts in 2016, vetted out by the Guardian Council, whose members were appointed by Khamenei himself. That disqualification was not accidental. Hassan Khomeini is known as a reformist, less hardline than his peers, more open to negotiation, and associated with the moderate wing of Iran's clerical establishment. The Council on Foreign Relations described him as someone who could theoretically serve as a bridge between the revolutionary system and reform-minded constituencies. And in May 2025, at his grandfather's mausoleum, Hassan Khomeini made a public statement that stands in direct contrast to the current war posture. He said, and this is a documented quote, that sometimes dignity is born through war, and sometimes through holding firm in the field of negotiation. That is not the language of the IRGC. That is not Mojtaba's language. That is a public signal from someone who sees a path out of this crisis that does not require permanent escalation. Now here is the structural problem Hassan Khomeini faces, and it explains why Mojtaba remains the frontrunner despite his own father not wanting him. Hassan Khomeini has no institutional base inside the IRGC, none whatsoever, and the IRGC has no relationship with him that would give it confidence in his loyalty. The IRGC views a reformist supreme leader as a direct existential threat to its own institutional power, economic, military, and political simultaneously. A leader willing to negotiate with Washington and ease sanctions is a leader who reduces the IRGC's role as the regime's economic backbone and military guarantor simultaneously. That is why, according to Iran International, IRGC commanders made direct phone calls and in-person visits to assembly members pushing for Mojtaba specifically. Not because Mojtaba is the most qualified candidate, but because Mojtaba is the most controllable one, and that distinction drives everything. The actual choice is between a supreme leader who is the IRGC's instrument and a supreme leader who might preserve the clerical establishment's independence from the security state. Now let's add the layer that makes this succession fight genuinely unprecedented in the entire history of the Islamic Republic, something no transition has ever faced before. On March 4th, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated publicly that whoever is named the next supreme leader will be a legitimate assassination target, regardless of his identity or location. Which means any person who accepts this position is accepting a public assassination designation from a nuclear-armed state that has already demonstrated it will execute exactly that kind of strike. The public statement changes the incentive structure for every single candidate in the running. Accepting the position means accepting a named assassination target designation. It particularly changes it for Hassan Khamenei and Arafi, neither of whom has an IRGC security apparatus personally dedicated to protecting them. Mojtaba, by contrast, is embedded inside the IRGC's own security infrastructure. He has spent decades building those relationships. In my view, Katz's statement may have inadvertently strengthened the IRGC's argument for Mojtaba by turning the succession question into a survival question rather than a governance question. There is one more figure in this story whose role is almost never discussed in English language coverage, but who represents a third option the clerical establishment is still considering. His name is Alireza Arafi. He is 67 years old. He is deputy chairman of the Assembly of Experts, the exact body currently voting on this decision. He is a member of the Guardian Council. He heads Iran's entire seminary system in Qom, and he is already sitting on the temporary leadership council formed after Khamenei's death. Arafi occupies a third lane. He is not the IRGC's instrument the way Mojtaba is, and he is not a reformist the way Hassan Khamenei is either. He represents something the religious hierarchy could accept without handing full institutional control to the security state. The Asia Times described him as a wild card. The Council on Foreign Relations noted he has significant religious standing and deep institutional roots built over decades. On prediction markets, as of early March, Mohseni Ejei, one of Khamenei's own listed preferences, was actually trading as the narrow frontrunner at roughly 18%, with Arafi and Hassan Khamenei close behind. What this entire succession fight is really about, when you strip away the names, the war, and Trump's public statements, is a generational question about the nature of the Iranian state. Will the Islamic Republic emerge from this war as a clerical state that happens to have a powerful military, or as a military state that happens to maintain a clerical veneer? That is not an abstract question. The answer determines whether Iran can ever negotiate a serious exit from this conflict, or whether permanent confrontation becomes the default. A supreme leader chosen by and dependent on the IRGC is, in practice, a supreme leader the IRGC controls, which means any future diplomatic opening requires IRGC buy-in, not just clerical buy-in. A supreme leader from outside the IRGC's direct network preserves at least the structural possibility of independent foreign policy decisions. And as of March 6th, that question is being decided inside an 88-member body, operating under active bombing, under direct IRGC pressure, and under a public Israeli assassination threat. That name will tell you more about Iran's strategic direction for the next decade than any weapon system, any diplomatic statement, or any military outcome on the current battlefield. Like and subscribe if this kind of analysis is useful to you. Part 4 covers Washington's actual strategic options from here and the economic figure underneath this war that may matter more than any weapon system. Here is what nobody in the mainstream coverage is saying directly. Washington's attempt to block Mojtaba may have already failed. According to Iran International, citing sources inside the process, the IRGC began pressuring Assembly of Experts members on March 3rd, just 3 days after Khamenei's killing. The pressure was not subtle. Sources described in-person visits, repeated phone calls, and what members characterized as psychological coercion to vote for Mojtaba, and to vote fast. An online session was convened the same day. Members who tried to argue against Mojtaba were given, in the words of participants, limited time to speak. Discussion was cut off. A vote was held. Then, before the count was even completed, U.S. and Israeli aircraft struck the Assembly of Experts office building in Qom. The session was thrown into chaos. A second session was scheduled for March 5th. 8 assembly members publicly announced they would boycott it. They described the entire process as constitutionally illegitimate. And yet, as of March 6th, multiple outlets, Iran International, Bloomberg, CBS News, The Washington Post, report that Mojtaba Khamenei remains the frontrunner with a formal announcement described as imminent. Trump called all of this a waste of time. He said the people selecting Mojtaba are, quote, wasting their time. What he did not say is what Washington plans to do about it. And that gap between what Trump is demanding publicly and what Washington can actually deliver is precisely where the Venezuela comparison breaks down completely. Let's look at what actually happened in Venezuela, because Trump keeps returning to it, and the comparison deserves careful scrutiny before it gets accepted as a template. In January 2026, U.S. forces raided Caracas, captured Maduro, flew him to New York to face federal drug charges, and declared they would run the country until a transition was complete. His vice president Rodriguez took over, while publicly demanding Maduro's release and calling the entire operation a savage attack on Venezuelan sovereignty. Trump called it the perfect scenario. And structurally, it worked because several very specific conditions were in place. conditions that simply do not exist in Iran. Venezuela had no significant allied powers standing behind Maduro. It had no nuclear deterrent, no regional proxy network, and no deep ideological base that transcended a single political party. Iran has none of those vulnerabilities. What it has instead is a 47-year-old revolutionary state, a self-reinforcing clerical legitimacy structure, and an IRGC that controls the economy and the guns simultaneously. The IRGC did not disintegrate after Khamenei was killed. It accelerated. It pressured the Assembly of Experts to move within 72 hours. It is currently driving Iran's retaliatory strikes across the region. In my view, the most important thing Trump said in his Axios interview was not about Mojtaba. It was the line that followed. He said most of the people Washington had in mind as alternatives are now dead. That means the strike campaign, whatever it achieved militarily, eliminated the exact figures who might have offered a credible post-IRGC alternative inside Iran's system. The people Washington would have preferred are gone. The people the IRGC prefers are still standing. And the IRGC is now the only fully functional power structure inside Iran. There is a specific detail in this succession story that has received almost no attention in English language coverage, and it changes the entire strategic picture. U.S. Treasury sanctions from 2019 formally penalized Mojtaba for acting as Supreme Leader without ever being elected to any position. Washington had this documented 6 years before the war started. Read that again. The U.S. government's own legal record states that Mojtaba was already functionally running significant parts of the Supreme Leader's office years before his father died. This was not speculation by outside analysts. This was Washington's formal documented finding, published in its own Federal Register, attached to its own executive order, which means Trump's statement that Mojtaba is unacceptable is being made about a man whom the U.S. Treasury Department formally identified as a de facto power holder more than 6 years ago. Washington knew who Mojtaba was. Washington sanctioned him. And the strikes that were supposed to create an opening for a different Iran appear to have eliminated his competitors instead. Now let's talk about what is actually happening inside the Assembly of Experts right now, because that institution is under pressures it was never constitutionally designed to withstand. The Assembly was built for a peacetime transition, deliberate, opaque, managed over weeks or months with extensive internal negotiation among senior clerics. What it is facing instead is a wartime vote, conducted online under active bombing, with its own office in Qom already struck once during the process, and with IRGC commanders making direct contact with members. Bloomberg reported on March 5th that the Assembly has narrowed its list and will announce a decision as soon as possible. Senior cleric Ayatollah Khatami told Iranian state TV they were close to a conclusion. The Daily Telegraph reported that if Mojtaba is confirmed, he will likely lean more heavily on the IRGC than his father ever did, because unlike his father, he has no independent clerical legitimacy to fall back on. His father spent decades building religious credibility through scholarship and public doctrine. Mojtaba has spent decades building operational networks through the IRGC and the Basij. That distinction matters enormously for what kind of Iran emerges from this war. A supreme leader dependent on the IRGC for legitimacy is, in practice, a supreme leader the IRGC controls. What this suggests is that the military campaign has not weakened the IRGC's grip on Iran. It may have strengthened it, by eliminating clerical figures who might have provided an independent check. In my view, this is the central paradox of these strikes. No senior official has addressed it. The targeting logic may have produced the exact outcome Washington publicly said it wanted to prevent. Before we go further, let's talk about the one person in this entire story whose role is almost never discussed, but who may now hold more structural leverage over Iran's future than anyone else alive. His name is Hassan Khomeini, grandson of Ruhollah Khomeini, founder of the Islamic Republic, and his role in this succession fight reveals exactly how deep the fractures inside Iran's own system actually run right now. Iran's Ministry of Intelligence quietly reached out to the CIA through a third country's intelligence service. The message: they wanted to discuss terms for ending the war. Trump's response, posted on Truth Social and repeated to reporters, was 3 words: too late. That exchange captures the core problem with Washington's current strategic position. According to CNN, Trump's own senior officials confirmed the outreach but said it changed nothing. One official described it directly: this is a military action, and it has got to run its course. So what exactly is the course it needs to run? That is the question nobody in Washington has answered clearly. And the absence of that answer is itself a major strategic problem. Trump has given different timelines in different interviews, 4 to 5 weeks in one, a few days in another, with the option to restart in a few years. In a third, he said there were no time limits at all. Hegseth has said this is not Iraq, not a democracy-building exercise, not endless. Trump then said he was not bound by post-Iraq concerns and would not rule out ground troops. This is not a communications problem. It is a strategy problem. And it matters because Iran's surviving leadership has a specific tactical advantage when Washington cannot define what winning looks like. Trump's publicly stated conditions are full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear and missile programs and an end to support for all regional proxy groups. Those were the pre-war demands Iran rejected. Here is the problem with those conditions in the current context. The Iranian leadership structure is in active flux. Nobody in Tehran can currently commit to anything across all of Iran's fractured power centers. Trump acknowledged this directly. He said, "The people we had in mind are dead." Then he added, "And this is the part the coverage missed. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody." That statement has an embedded logic that Washington has not addressed publicly. You cannot negotiate a deal with a counterpart who is either dead or about to be killed by your ally. And yet Israel has explicitly declared that any new supreme leader is a target regardless of identity, which means Washington's ally has publicly eliminated the possibility of a stable Iranian interlocutor. Israel's goal and Washington's goal are in direct structural tension right now. One requires a stable Iranian counterpart to negotiate with. The other has declared it will eliminate any such person. Now let's talk about the economic dimension, because this is the number that will ultimately determine how long this war can continue, and it has received almost no attention in relation to the succession question. Before the war started, Iran's rial had already collapsed from 42,000 to over 1.1 million against the dollar, inflation above 40%, with the World Bank projecting contraction through both 2025 and 2026. Iran had been losing roughly $5 billion per year in oil export revenue, specifically because of sanctions evasion costs, selling at a discount through shadow fleets and intermediaries to avoid U.S. enforcement. The IRGC controls a disproportionate share of what revenue remains. Military and security institutions take at least 16% of the budget. IRGC-linked oil revenue is several times larger than the civilian government's share, making the IRGC's institutional power inseparable from its economic position. In IRGC terms, any diplomatic opening that eases sanctions directly threatens its dominance. A supreme leader who trades nuclear concessions for sanctions relief is handing the regime's economic backbone to Washington, which is precisely why the IRGC is pushing Mojtaba, not just for ideological reasons, but because Mojtaba's continuation of the current system preserves the IRGC's economic dominance inside Iran. Over 14 million barrels per day move through the Strait of Hormuz, roughly one-third of global seaborne crude exports. 3/4 of that goes to China, India, Japan, and South Korea. CNBC's energy analysts were direct on this point. A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is, in their words, a guaranteed global recession, not a risk of recession. A guarantee. Iran has not fully closed the strait as of March 6th, but the threat alone has already pushed Brent crude from roughly $70 to over $80 per barrel within a week of the strike's beginning. Analysts forecast sustained disruption could push prices toward $100 per barrel, adding roughly 0.8% to global inflation at a time when central banks had only recently tamed post-pandemic price rises. This creates a strategic constraint on Washington. The more aggressively the U.S. strikes, the more Iran's retaliation threatens the strait, putting direct pressure on the European and Asian allies Washington needs most. Trump said publicly he was not concerned if gas prices went up. But his European and Asian allies, who depend on Gulf energy far more than the U.S. does, are a different calculation entirely. In my view, this is the central contradiction of Washington's current position. The military campaign designed to create leverage is simultaneously generating economic pressure on the very countries it needs on its side. So what are Washington's actual options from here, as of March 6th? In practical terms, there are three, and not one of them offers a clean or obvious path forward. The first option is continued strikes until the regime collapses from within, requiring military, security, or clerical figures to defect in enough numbers to make governance impossible. Trump has explicitly called on IRGC members to lay down arms, offering full immunity. But as of March 6th, there is no public evidence of significant defections. The second option is a negotiated freeze, a ceasefire tied to Iran, accepting verifiable nuclear limits without full dismantlement. This requires a new supreme leader to make his first act the repudiation of everything his predecessor died defending. LSE analysts called this technically conceivable but politically near impossible. The third option is what the CIA backchannel suggests is already being explored, a de facto pause, framed as a military timeout rather than a deal, letting both sides step back without formally conceding anything. That third option is what the succession question makes or breaks, and this is the direct link between the assembly vote and the war's trajectory. A supreme leader owned by the IRGC cannot accept a pause that looks like capitulation. A leader with independent clerical legitimacy might frame the same pause as a sovereign strategic decision. This is why who walks out of the Assembly of Experts vote matters beyond Iran's internal politics. The identity of the next Supreme Leader determines which of Washington's 3 options is structurally available. As of March 6th, Real in freefall, oil above $80, over 500 ballistic missiles, and nearly 2,000 drones fired since February 28th, the CIA backchannel sitting unanswered. The window for the 3rd option is not permanently open, and the number that matters most right now is not a weapons count, a casualty figure, or a troop deployment. It is the exchange rate of the Iranian rial, because when a population can no longer afford to eat, the calculation of every institution inside that country changes. That is where this war will ultimately be decided, not on any battlefield. In the arithmetic of a currency that has lost 20,000 times its value over 4 decades and is still falling.